always thought that the people who loved you the most were supposed to be there for your proudest moments, but life has a cruel way of teaching you that blood and family don't always equal love. I had worked harder than I ever had in my entire life to finally finish my degree. Years of balancing late-night study sessions with early mornings at work, juggling house chores, sacrificing sleep, putting my dreams on hold for my family, and still pushing through when everyone else thought I would quit. My graduation day was not just about a piece of paper or wearing a cap and gown, it was proof that every tear, every sleepless night, every humiliation I endured to keep going was worth it. And I thought, naively, that when I walked across that stage, my husband, my children, my parents, and my siblings would be right there cheering me on. But when the day finally came, I stood in my robe in the mirror, fixing the tassel on my cap with trembling fingers, and I felt a pit of dread form in my stomach. My phone buzzed over and over, not with messages of excitement or encouragement, but with excuses. My mother texted me that she wouldn't be able to make it because she had promised my aunt she would help set up for a small party. My father never even bothered to send a message. My sister called me briefly, not to congratulate me, but to tell me she was too busy getting her nails done because she had a date later that evening. And my husband, the man who had seen me cry at the kitchen table with my head buried in textbooks, the man who had reassured me that all of this was worth it, looked at me that morning with barely disguised indifference. He said the kids didn't really want to go, that they were bored by the idea of some long ceremony, and instead they were all going to his cousin's birthday barbecue. A birthday barbecue. That was apparently more important than watching me walk across the stage after years of grueling effort. I remember staring at him, my voice breaking as I asked if he was serious, and he shrugged like I was making too big of a deal out of it. "You'll get your diploma anyway," he said. "What difference does it make if we're there?" The difference, I wanted to scream, was everything. But instead, I stood frozen, with my cap in my hand and tears burning the corners of my eyes. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My own children, my babies who I thought would be proud of me, who I had hoped would remember this day and say, "That was the day Mom showed us it's never too late to chase your dreams," they were going to be eating hot dogs at a barbecue while I stood alone in a crowd of cheering families. I swallowed the hurt because what else could I do? I didn't want to beg them to come. I didn't want to force anyone to celebrate me. So I grabbed my keys and left quietly, telling myself maybe it wouldn't matter once I got there, once I felt the energy of the room, once I heard my name called. But nothing prepared me for the emptiness of walking into that auditorium alone, surrounded by classmates whose families carried balloons, flowers, posters with their names written in bold letters, parents wiping tears from their eyes, siblings hugging tightly, husbands and wives recording every second on their phones. I tried to smile, tried to keep my chin up, but with every passing minute the weight of their absence crushed me harder. When my name was called and I walked across the stage, I looked out into the crowd instinctively, searching for a familiar face, even though I already knew none were there. My heart cracked open as the clapping echoed, generic and impersonal, while my seatmates were met with cheers so loud they shook the room. I walked back down with my diploma in my hand, but all I felt was humiliation. It wasn't just that my family didn't come. It was that their absence screamed louder than anything else. It was a public exposure of how little I mattered to them. I felt small, invisible, and unwanted, sitting there while others were engulfed in love and joy. After the ceremony ended, classmates posed for pictures with their families. They held bouquets, lifted their children in their arms, kissed their partners, and wrapped their arms around each other proudly. I stood off to the side, pretending to scroll through my phone, too embarrassed to ask a stranger to take a picture of me alone in my gown. Eventually, I walked out into the parking lot, clutching my diploma case like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. I sat in my car and cried so hard my chest hurt. I had never felt so abandoned in my life. The drive home was long, but the longer I drove, the more the anger started to build. Every mile added another layer of rage over the sadness. They had stolen that moment from me, a moment I had earned, a moment I had dreamed of. And for what? A barbecue. A nail appointment. A party. Was I really worth so little to the people I had sacrificed so much for? By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew one thing for certain: they might have mocked my accomplishments with their absence, but I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. When I finally walked across that stage, holding my diploma in trembling hands, I told myself not to cry. I smiled for the cameras, though there were no familiar faces in the crowd to cheer for me, no one shouting my name, no children waving little signs that said, "Go Mom," like I had secretly dreamed about for months. Instead, I looked out into the sea of strangers and forced myself to pretend that it was enough, that my accomplishment didn't need validation from the very people I loved most. But deep inside, the silence of their absence screamed louder than any cheer ever could. When the ceremony ended and everyone around me rushed into the arms of their loved ones, I walked alone out of that building, clutching my diploma so tightly I could feel the paper bend, as if it was the only thing holding me together. The drive home felt endless. Every streetlight seemed to mock me, every billboard flashing families smiling together only deepened the knife in my chest. When I finally pulled into my driveway, my heart sank. Their cars were all there. My husband's truck, my kids' bikes in the yard. It wasn't that they couldn't come. It was that they chose not to. My legs felt weak as I stepped into the house, my diploma still in my hand, and I walked straight into the living room, and there they were, all of them, sitting around the television laughing, eating the cake I had bought for my own celebration, the one I had put in the fridge the night before, the one I had written, "Congratulations, Mom," on in shaky icing because I foolishly thought they'd be excited to share it with me. My husband barely looked up when I entered. My kids glanced at me, giggled, and then looked back at their phones. It was like I didn't even exist. Finally, I forced myself to ask, my voice cracking, "Why didn't you come? Why didn't any of you come?" My husband smirked, the kind of smirk that cuts deeper than words, and said, "We had more important things to do. It's just a graduation, not like you cured cancer." My kids laughed at his joke, they actually laughed. My chest burned, my eyes stung, but I stood there frozen, my diploma shaking in my hand as I realized that the people I had sacrificed everything for didn't even care enough to spend one afternoon acknowledging me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw that cake in their faces, that I wanted to tell them how many nights I had stayed awake studying. How many times I had cooked and cleaned while writing essays on barely 2 hours of sleep, how I had carried their world on my shoulders while building one of my own. But the words stuck in my throat because what good would it do? They had already shown me exactly where I stood in their lives. I quietly walked upstairs, shut the door to my room, and for the first time in years, I let myself cry like a child. I cried until my pillow was soaked, until my body shook, until the sun went down and I realized I couldn't stay in this role any longer. Something inside me snapped that night, not in anger but in clarity. If my family couldn't celebrate me, then I would celebrate myself. If they couldn't see my worth, then I would prove it in ways that would make them regret every single moment they dismissed me. That night, while they laughed downstairs and cut into my cake without me, I made myself a silent promise. This wasn't going to be the end of my story. This was only the beginning of theirs unraveling. The next morning, I woke up with puffy eyes and a pounding head, but for the first time in years, my mind was clear. I wasn't going to beg for love or attention anymore. If they wanted to act like my achievements were meaningless, then I would show them just how powerful I could be without them. I got dressed, put my diploma in a frame, and drove straight to the university's career office. Within weeks, I landed a position at a company that actually valued me. It wasn't glamorous at first, but it was mine. Every paycheck felt like a victory, every new responsibility felt like a step away from the chains my family had wrapped around me. For once, I wasn't just mom or the wife. I was me. But at home, things got uglier. The more I worked, the more my husband complained. "Dinner's not ready." "What kind of wife are you?" he'd snap. My kids followed his lead, tossing their dirty clothes around and demanding money like I was nothing more than an ATM. They mocked me when I came home late, rolling their eyes when I talked about work, dismissing me with cruel little jokes like, "Don't get too proud, you're still just mom." I bit my tongue, holding in my anger, but inside, I was boiling. They didn't see that every insult they threw only sharpened my resolve. They didn't know that their neglect was fueling the fire I needed to finally break free. Then came the moment that changed everything. One afternoon, I received a call from the company's owner himself. He had noticed my dedication, my late nights, the way I poured myself into the work. He offered me a promotion, one that came with a salary so high it made my hands shake when I heard the number. I accepted on the spot, my heart racing, because I knew what this meant: independence. Real, undeniable independence. That night, I came home to the same scene as always, my husband on the couch with a beer, my kids screaming at each other over the TV remote. I looked at them, really looked, and I felt nothing. No love, no connection, just a dull ache where my heart used to be. So I did something none of them saw coming. I sat them down, calmly, and told them the truth. I don't need any of you anymore. Not your approval, not your money, not your half-hearted support. I've built something for myself, and you can either respect it or watch me walk away forever. They laughed at me, of course. My husband smirked, saying, "You wouldn't last a week without us." My kids rolled their eyes, muttering, "Yeah right, Mom." Their arrogance stung, but it also sealed my decision. That night, while they slept, I packed my bags. I didn't take everything, just enough to remind me that I was worth more than the scraps of affection they had been giving me. The next morning, they woke up to find me gone. No breakfast on the table, no laundry folded, no quiet figure in the background holding their world together. For the first time in their lives, they had to face the emptiness they had left me with. And for the first time in mine, I felt free. The silence after I left was louder than any argument I had ever endured. For the first time in years, I woke up to peace. No demands, no ridicule, no dismissive looks. Just me, my own space, and the steady rhythm of a life that finally belonged to me. I threw myself into my career, and it paid off more than I could have ever imagined. Within a year, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I bought my own place, decorated it how I wanted, and filled it with laughter that came not from obligation, but from genuine joy. Colleagues who once barely knew my name now looked up to me, inspired by the way I had rebuilt myself from nothing. I was invited to conferences, asked to mentor younger employees, and celebrated for the same intelligence my family had once ignored. But then the calls started. At first, I ignored them. A missed call from my husband, a voicemail from my daughter, a text from my son. They were confused, angry, desperate. "When are you coming back? We can't do this without you. Dad says you're being dramatic." Each message dripped with the same entitlement that had driven me away. They didn't miss me. They missed the convenience of me. They missed the woman who cooked, cleaned, paid the bills, and held their lives together while they walked all over her. I let their words sit on my phone, unanswered, until one day my daughter sent a message that made me stop cold. "Mom, we went to Dad's friend's party last night. Everyone was asking where you were. They said it was embarrassing you weren't there." Embarrassing. That was the word that had followed me through every forgotten birthday, every empty chair at my graduation, every time I had been left behind. I laughed when I read it. Not because it was funny, but because of how blind they were. They still thought my worth only mattered in how it reflected on them. And in that moment, I knew my revenge wasn't going to be loud or vengeful, it was going to be my absence. My success. My refusal to crawl back. Weeks later, I was invited to an awards ceremony at work, the kind of event where the city's most respected professionals gathered. I walked into that room alone but radiant, dressed in a gown that made me feel untouchable, holding my head high as people congratulated me on achievements my own family had once mocked. And there, in the back of the room, I saw them, my husband and kids. They had shown up uninvited, desperate to attach themselves to the person they had abandoned. My husband tried to smile, like nothing had happened. My kids waved awkwardly, like they could erase years of cruelty with a half-hearted gesture. But I didn't break. I stood at that podium, accepted my award, and spoke directly from the heart. I stand here tonight not because it was easy, but because I finally stopped waiting for people who never showed up for me. I learned that sometimes the family you're born into, or even the one you build, doesn't recognize your worth. And when they don't, you owe it to yourself to recognize it on your own. The room erupted in applause, and for once, I didn't look to the back of the crowd for approval. I didn't need it anymore. When I walked past them afterward, my husband whispered, "Come home. We can fix this." My kids looked at me like strangers seeing someone they couldn't control. I didn't stop, I didn't cry, I didn't even hesitate. I looked at him and simply said, "You had your chance. You all did. And you threw it away." That was my closure. Not revenge in the traditional sense, but something far more powerful. I showed them that the woman they had dismissed, mocked, and abandoned had risen higher than they could ever imagine, without them. And as I walked out of that hall, the sound of applause still echoing behind me, I knew I had finally graduated from more than just school. I had graduated from their neglect, from their cruelty, from the life they tried to chain me to.